Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. It's good to be back after a week off. Today is Monday, October 24th, 2022. Tonight is a question and answer. So, what we do for tonight's broadcast, which we do every other broadcast, is we just take live questions from the audience. You can always submit questions, comments, things you'd like me to speak about to webinar at evoketherapy.com anytime throughout the week. Those will be queued up at the top of these broadcasts if there's something you'd like me to address. And I'll get to those before I get any live questions during the broadcast this evening. So there was one that came in. There were a couple that came in actually. So I'm going to get to the one that's in our chat just next. But this was something I posted on social media, and somebody asked me to talk about it during one of these broadcasts. So I thought I'd share it with you. For those of you that are listening, it might be a little bit difficult to imagine. So what I'd recommend is you go to my Instagram account at Dr. Brad Reedy, using the handle at Dr. Brad Reedy, and you can see the drawing there. The drawing is of a circle. Joseph Campbell was once explained to describe a human being, to describe the psyche, the conscious, the unconscious. And he said, I'm going to borrow from Plato this idea that if we can imagine the human being to be a circle, and then somewhere around two-thirds or three-quarters up of that circle, there's a horizontal line that separates a smaller wedge and a larger wedge. In the smaller and top wedge, there's a square. And in the bottom wedge, at the center of the entire circle, is a circle. And so what he described was this line that creates the small and the large wedge is the line between our conscious and our unconscious. And the square that's in the top little wedge is our ego. And that's who we think we are, right? That's our conscious self. One of the confusing things that goes on often in psychotherapy when I'm talking with somebody and offering an interpretation or an idea or reflecting back something I've heard, essentially, that's what that means. They'll often simply deny it, which might be accurate. But part of what I explain and teach is that there can be some allowance for the possibility that there could be something unconscious at play that you're not able to see. So who we think we are is within the consciousness of ourselves, within the conscious center of ourselves. But really who we are, really what drives behavior is all of that energy that's in the unconscious. That's the center of who we are. And so the way that I think about this circle, this drawing from Joseph Campbell with the circle, the line horizontally, two-thirds, three-quarters of the way up, the square in the top, small wedge, the circle in the center of the entire circle, in the bottom, larger wedge, is I see our job as individuals and also as a psychotherapist to help move that line down lower and lower, to become more and more conscious so that we can get closer and closer to who we are. Everybody's heard the analogy of the tip of the iceberg, right? There's somewhere around 10% of an iceberg that shows when it's floating in water, and that the vast majority of the mass is underwater and invisible to the naked eye above water. And that essentially is this model. You can think of it as the tip of the iceberg model, that what's underneath is driving our behaviors. And that's very difficult for us to imagine. We don't have the experience with our unconscious. We have it in dreams. We have it sometimes if you're doing psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, if you happen to get drunk, a lot will come out that during your conscious, non-altered, non-sleeping state has slumbered, is not awake, is not present. But once you weaken the ego through substances, through sleep, where it goes to sleep, once you get rid of the ego, and the ego is kind of like it's like the gatekeeper. It's the part of us that wants to be good, wants to be acceptable. It's taking our most base urges and our ideas about morality that initially come from our parents, the zeitgeist, the teachers, the adults, the big people, as they say, that raise us. And so it's trying to find a balance, trying to kind of negotiate in between those urges and our morality. And one of the examples that's often given is if you have an urge to be violent, to be aggressive, which we all have some of that in us somewhere. You can play football, right? The ego has found a way for you to play football or do kickboxing and to get that urge out, maybe to chop wood, right? So our goal in this work, not just with your children, but with parents, is to become more and more conscious. I really, really am drawn to what Daniel Siegel recently said. I'm going to pull it up here so I get the quote exactly right. It's not a long quote, but it's profound in its simplicity. Daniel Siegel said, "The strongest predictor of a child's well-being is a parent's self-understanding." Maybe you can write that up there, Dawn, and post it in the chat. I'm going to read it again. The strongest predictor of a child's well-being is a parent's self-understanding. And so the painful work of becoming more conscious, becoming more aware of ourselves, is to begin to integrate the experiences, the messages, the emotions, the drives, the things that we were taught essentially were unacceptable, not useful, would cause us to be unloved or unappreciated or cast out from the group. And once those things become conscious, and we've been told that if they become conscious, that they'll destroy us. When in actuality, keeping them unconscious is what destroys you. If you don't know, for example, you have this is going to sound dramatic to most people because most people will not relate to this. But if you have a competitiveness with your child, for example, if you feel competitive with your child and you're not aware of that, you're more likely to act it out. But if you become aware of it, then it has less power over you. In fact, in the Gnostic Gospels, in a group of documents that were found in the 1940s, apparently were these writings from the time of Jesus Christ. And one of the most famous, perhaps the most famous quote from the Gnostic Gospels, which, by the way, sounds a lot more like Buddhism than it does what we associate with modern Christianity. Jesus was purported to have said that if we bring forth what is within us, it will save us. And if we don't bring forth what is within us, it will destroy us. That's that idea of becoming conscious, becoming more aware of ourselves. That's why we go to therapy, and the therapist's most common, almost a cliche tool is to ask the client, how do you feel? What's going on for you? And we become practiced in understanding the drives. In Greek mythology, those drives, those instincts were personified in the gods. A lot of myths and religions will take that energy, the energy to be angry, the energy to love, the energy to spread peace and joy, the various energies in us, and they'll create and project them outward into characters that then have their own energy. Zeus has an energy, Apollo had an energy, Aphrodite had an energy, right? Hades had an energy. And those were really just the Greeks trying to make sense of the human psyche and separate it out into parts. So I wanted to share that quote because somebody asked me to, share that image and explanation. All right. For pre-submitted questions, I have one that's loaded up here. If you want to ask me any questions, you can ask them at any time, and Don will pass them on to me when there's space in the broadcast. Somebody writes, you said that one of the most formative things your therapist has done for you over the years is to say that no matter what you shared and how ridiculous it sounded, she would believe you, that you had a good reason to do so, and be genuinely curious to know why you made that decision. I was thinking, if that made such a huge impact on you as an adult and someone educated and well versed in this sort of teaching and knowledge, how much more huge of an impact might it have been if we approached our children with that sort of curiosity rather than judgment? Can you speak a little bit more to this and flesh it out for us? What would this look like in real life? What would it look like if our children are not fulfilling their responsibilities and obligations or disappointing us in some way? How could we approach this with curiosity? So it's a great question, and that's actually why I share the idea. Part of what I'm trying to do at times for the listeners and the watchers of these broadcasts is to give you a sense of what good therapy sounds like. But essentially, I'm talking about attachment theory. I'm talking about what Daniel Siegel was referring to when I just quoted him saying that the greatest predictor of a child's well-being is the self-awareness of the parent. That when you are intact, when you are mature, when you can manage your own impulses, when you're anger, frustration, disappointment can be handled with you and your resources, your peers, your partner, your spouse, your co-parent, if they're available to you, your therapist, your sponsor, your support group. When you can have the wherewithal, internally and externally, to take care of yourself, then when your child acts out in a way, you're not responding to them in such a way to get them to get you to calm down, to get you to be at peace again. If you're really disappointed and angry after they admit or you ever get caught in some lie, if you're able to manage those emotions or contain them, then you can be there for the child. If we don't take responsibility for our own feelings and reactions, we can't be curious, right? We're in fight or flight mood, fight or flight instinct, impulse. And our children will feel the need to take care of us. They'll feel unsafe. And so they won't get to explore themselves. Well, they won't get to understand why they did this thing that seemed obviously self-sabotaging, obviously self-destructive. So your question is absolutely what I'm implying. We take care of ourselves. It's a practice, it's a discipline. It's difficult. You will not get it perfect. You'll probably have minutes in a day where you get it perfectly, and that's probably when you're alone. But in all reality, you're going to struggle with this, but you develop a practice. Your child knows it's part of the conversation in the family that your reactions are your responsibility. I shared when I taught this principle originally, or at least one of the times that I've taught it originally, that there's a quote from J.D. Gill, the one who actually did this for me, who is my therapist, who's written a book about it. She said, "In good therapy, therapy is the childhood you never had, and the therapist is the parent that you never had." In Evoke's idea of therapy, which we call attachment-based therapy, and by the way, let me be clear. Attachment-based therapy is not knowing simply about the various styles of attachment: anxious avoidant, anxious ambivalent, disorganized, right? It's not that. That's just a tiny granule on the beach of the theory. Really, what attachment-based therapy is understanding that how the therapist feels, thinks, behaves, reacts, responds toward the client, how they talk to them, is the reparative experience. So after a while, think about this. After a while, to the extent that you didn't have a secure attachment, and we all have some fractures or breaks in that, nobody has a perfect parent that doesn't exist. You go into a therapist office, you tell them crazy, embarrassing, shameful things. They respond with curiosity and non-judgment instead of reacting with fear and disappointment and anger and frustration and exhaustion. But they respond with curiosity and compassion. Eventually, after a while, you begin to realize, not just on a conscious intellectual level, but in a deep level, that what other people think and feel about you is not about you necessarily. It doesn't mean that you turn a blind eye to everybody's reaction all the time and walk through life ignorantly, stepping on people's toes, running over people. I'm not talking about that. But essentially, you stop being driven by other people's reactions. You stop being held hostage by other people's reaction. You stop letting it weigh on you the way it does when you're small, when you're young, when you're one of the little people. So absolutely, that is the work. I mean, the journey of the heroic parent, the audacity to be you, both the books I wrote are based in this idea that we can take the idea of attachment-based therapy, of what I call adequate therapy. I use the word adequate because nobody's perfect. It's good enough, right? We can take our experience from adequate therapy as a client and we can begin to extrapolate that to the rest of the world. So what happens for us is, where there are wounds and dents and bruises that are unhealed, we have a reparative experience in therapy, and then we go out into the world and we start to measure our interactions, our behavior, other people's reactions to us against this kind of ideal, this curious, capable, adult, mature, differentiated person who's practicing therapy. And yes, part of that is then to take back to your parenting role and to learn to react that way. I want to be as clear as I can, because one of the things that I often misquoted about is this idea. I am not telling you not to feel angry or sad or disappointed or afraid when your child acts a certain way. Those are all normal, healthy human reactions. What I am saying is to take those responses somewhere else, to sort them out, to kind of get the charge and the energy out of them. When you take care of those over here, and I'm pointing over to my left to the nebulous other place with your sponsor, your friend, whomever, when you deal with them over there, then you come back to the child and you can respond to them in a sense with what they need instead of what you need because you've already taken care of your needs over here. So don't hear me say don't feel angry or sad or scared when your child acts out. That would be crazy of me to say that. That'd be antithetical to everything I do teach. But I'm saying take responsibility for it. Take care of your feelings. If you don't, whether you like it or not, the child will be inclined to take care of you because it's a survival instinct. If you get too mad, too scared, too disappointed on a cellular level, the human child experience is mom and dad, the caregivers that are literally keeping me alive, might go away. They might have enough of me and abandon me, and I can't survive. So the child has it's in his or her or their DNA to take care of you. And that's why we practice this. That's why we look to therapists and therapy experiences as this model. That's why we try to practice non-judgment. The simplest way to illustrate this, if your child comes and tells you something that you find shocking, and your response is to gasp in fear or disgust, as in, oh my goodness, the one thing the child knows immediately is that you're not safe. And they have to keep you away from the information. Tell it to somebody else, hide it. Definitely not talk to you and tell you the truth. So that's a great response, a great question, because it's not only a possibility, but it is the implication of why I talk about therapy and attachment-based therapy to my parenting clients, to the parenting audience, is because we're extrapolating from that model to understand the ideal. And to be clear, we don't ever I've never seen anybody who arrives at the ideal all the time. It's a work in progress. It's a practice. That's why we call it a practice. So thanks for the question. The next question that pops up, it says, our son is 16. He has been to Evoke twice. He's at his second therapeutic boarding school. He's been there for 5 months now. He has given up. He had given up. Says he can't do it. Says he's just going to be a treatment kid. No one can force him. However, we cannot bring him home because he's not ready. And if he's not working, we no longer want to pay for it. Are there any other options to where he can go? We have offered all the support we know. You know, that's an extraordinarily tough question in the sense that I don't have a wonderful, easy answer that jumps to mind. It's something I think you're going to have to sort out. Well, at least in my paradigm, where I would sort it out was with a therapist over several weeks' time. A therapist who's focusing on, one of the things I teach when I talk to other programs and definitely when I'm training our therapists and our staff is remember that the parent themselves is a child trying to figure out their life, trying to become who they are, trying to deal with their shame, trying to deal with their unconscious, their blind spots. So finding where you stand in this process is your responsibility. One of the things I've said to my youngest daughter recently, and I've thought about this a lot lately in various contexts. When she was pushing against a boundary and I was holding a firm and clear line with a certain boundary. Wasn't threatening, wasn't overwhelming, wasn't using my big loud presence to try to scare her into compliance, but it was just holding a boundary clearly and gently and rationally with her. She said to me at one point with that boundary, she said, I don't think I can be happy with this rule, essentially. And it was a genuine thought on her part. I didn't feel like it was manipulation. I felt like she was telling the truth. She'd asked for this conversation. I wasn't initiating it. She said, I don't think I can be happy in that context. And I said to her, you're going to have to figure that out. She's only 14. But I said that's your work. That's your life's job to figure out how to be happy in the context of things that are outside of your control, limits and boundaries and structure. So, the thoughts I have with your 15-year-old son is what I have to do in this exercise is I first try to help the parents to let go of the child changing. Let's assume that he's not going to change. In fact, I'll often have them write letters saying, we're not going to base our how our day is going, how our week is going, how we are doing based on whether or not you are changed. We give up. You may never change. And then the next step, which is the more difficult part, is and here's our boundary. You're going to stay in this program for a while, or you're going to stay in this program until X objective is met, or until this age. You get to decide what that looks like. But we're going to let go. All we're doing is in our world is giving you the information, the treatment, the resources that we think will be helpful to you, and then after that, it's up to you. In terms of bringing a 15 or 16-year-old home, at least in the United States, it's your obligation to be responsible for their care until they're 18. And I'm assuming, I don't want to be dramatic, but I'm assuming that you're not thinking about giving them over to the state, right? Putting them in an orphanage. I don't mean to be ridiculous, but that's an option, of course. And I assume that that's not where you're going. But short of that, maybe it's living with a friend's house. Maybe it's living with a relative who's up to the task. When I've worked with parents who have gotten to that stage that you're describing and discussing, and they're starting to consider the child living with friends or living with relatives, they're at the point of saying, "Look, if this is going to make you happy, if you think this is where where you're going to thrive, then we hope you do." Um, but there are no good answers. There are no simple answers. There's no other door. There's no magical place or magical solution. It's about first and foremost a kind of a letting go and detaching experience for you with love. And then it's deciding what you have before you, which is if it's not going to be programs, it's going to be other people that you know and have some trust in, right? Even if the house that he's choosing is going to be more liberal and open minded and not as strict with rules, part of what you're saying is go be happy there. Or, of course, in extraordinary circumstances, which has never had to happen to me as a professional in the role of parent coaching and parent work and working with children who struggle, you could turn them over to the state for adoption to an adoption agency, to an orphanage. But that even saying that, I know that sounds ridiculous. I just want to acknowledge that you have limited choices. And in the meantime, find out, one of the things that my wife and I have talked about with our kids at various times, we have kids as old as 29 and 28, is, maybe we can open things up at home. Maybe we can say, we'll try it a different way. We'll change our paradigm. I know we've changed our paradigm over the years. I know for a fact in a lot of ways. Even from our first child who's 29 to our fourth child who's 14, we are unrecognizable to ourselves, if you will. If you saw a description of the way we parented when our 29-year-old was 15 and 14 compared to the way we parent our 15 and 14-year-old, not only are they different people, but we are dramatically different people at the same time, because part of this process expands capacity, right? Expands your ability to tolerate things, your ability to see the big picture, your ability to negotiate, your ability to let go. And in some ways we have become, and one can become more clear in other areas. So nothing, I don't have any secret tricks to pull out of my sleeve on this one. Um, but that's the work. That's what I'm seeing. There's another question I was going to talk about. Looks like we have no questions right now. If there are any questions, you could submit them. But there was one I was thinking about earlier. Oh, Maybe I'll share this. Maybe I'll just share my post that I shared today. Maybe it'll be interesting to you from Instagram. That was the one I was thinking of. I posted this today on Instagram. We were talking about, I think I share all the time that my wife, my adult children and I will sit around talking therapy and theory often. And this was a conversation we got into this weekend about. I was saying that, in essence, the role of the therapist is to say to the client, you know, here's what's happening to you in your life, the reality of what's happening to your life, and I can't fix it, I can't remove it from your life, but I can sit with you and help you go through it, so you don't have to sit and be alone in it. And as I was describing this, my wife said at some point, she said, "That sounds really simple and basic." And I thought about that. I walked away and I thought that does sound too simple. That you're just present in their life, so they don't have to be alone. And as I was thinking about this, I came away with this quote that was, I think, more to the point. In attachment based therapy or psychotherapy in general, that's the context, the client may think you have some way around reality from the pain of it all. But what you do have is a clear sense of what it feels like to hurt and the offer of your presence so they don't have to go through it alone. In a lot of cases, when somebody brings me an issue, a dilemma, could be marriage, could be parenting, it's not that different than the one was just presented to me earlier about this 15-year-old son of these parents. I can lay out the options for you. You've heard me say many times that in the work that I do, it can be really helpful to remind yourself to internalize this mantra that you don't get to win, but you get to choose how to lose. And that applies to a lot of circumstances and decisions. So I'll often present two choices, maybe three or four choices, however many we think are reasonable. I'll present them to the client, reflect them back. We'll talk about the pros and cons of each, but there's no one decision. Think about the question that was just asked to me. There's no one decision that's easy, that everybody's happy and everybody goes forward with peace and serenity and clarity, right? It's going to be a painful decision no matter where you go. So first of all, you get to choose how to lose. And second of all, psychotherapy is the act of saying, look, I know that it's hard. There's loss, there's pain, there's people in your life that are hurting themselves. The list of painful experiences is infinite, essentially, in the human experience. And I can't take those away from you. And I don't have a secret trick. I don't have a hack where it stops hurting. But what I do have is an empathic response that I know what grief feels like. I know what loss feels like. I might not know your specific circumstances. I might be a different gender than you. I might be at a different age than you. My child might have different diagnoses and different issues, right? Some parents are dealing with children on the autism spectrum disorder. Some people are dealing with, young adults who have a substance use disorder. Some people are dealing with students who are developing schizophrenia. Some are developing someone who's anxious or depressed and finding it difficult to even go out and go to school. The list is human and broad. So I might not have that, but I know what it feels like to hurt, to be sad, to be scared, to feel hopeless and powerless. And what I do have is my presence. I can sit with you each week, and so you don't have to be alone in it. One thing I've learned as I've grown in this process of being a person and being a therapist is that I don't have solutions for people. I have to sit with them in their unsolvable problems. And that I know that therapy doesn't always make you happy at the end, at the end of the hour. Sometimes you have just as much pain and sadness as where you begin. Sometimes you might even have more. But what you can have a sense of is that you're not alone. And of all of the human experiences that I know, not being alone, knowing that you have company, knowing that someone sees you, cares for you, have some sense of understanding of what it's like to be you, can offer great comfort in the face of all of these uncontrollable circumstances that all of us encounter in various ways. And it's the same with parenting, just like that question earlier. we take that idea and we sit with our children in the same way. Can you sit with your child and not solve it? Which, by the way, feels like or seems like solving to you, and they experience as dismissive and gaslighting. What feels like a solution to the parent or to the therapist or to the spouse who's listening to a spouse describe a difficult situation in their life, what feels like solutions and solving feels to the other person like discounting and dismissing and disregarding and not listening and not understanding. That's why psychotherapy is a difficult skill to practice and to master after many years, because we get into it, most of us, I would say virtually all of us, get into it because we think we can offer the world this great gift of problem solving and sorting through things and making everything better. Most likely that stemmed from our own childhood, where we had that experience of making our mother and father happy and figuring that out first. And so we take that thought and we go out to the world and we say, well, we can make everybody happy. And of course, what you learn, if your practice is robust enough, is that it's not your job to make people happy. It's your job to help people feel what they need to feel, which is oftentimes very, very uncomfortable, but also to offer them your presence, which takes great strength and discipline and practice. Because we all have, especially people who have an ability to empathize, we all have an urge to try to reduce the suffering of the people that we care about. And we think that that's wanted and needed in this situation. We think that that's what the situation calls for. But what I've learned as a psychotherapist is what's called for in that situation is some tolerance for the empathic misery of sitting with somebody that you care genuinely about and not fixing it. Yes, you can offer ideas at times, but I promise you that the average person, rarely do I meet somebody who naturally has a sense of when to offer that or not. Most people over offer solutions. It takes training to not say the thing, right? To be quiet, to listen. And then back to the parenting questions with that other question. I know there's another question that's popped up. Back to the parenting question. And then where the teaching occurs is with your boundaries, with your rules, with your consequences. I know for me, in moments of stress and feeling triggered, I will use anger, my largeness, like I said earlier on this broadcast. That's my kind of go-to mother tongue, if you will. And I'm a big person. I have a loud voice. I'm articulate verbally, so I'll use those tools to try to control or intimidate my children into compliance or shame them. Again, none of these things do I aspire to do, but they're what I do naturally without effort. And so my work is to know those are my instincts, to manage them, to not react, to respond with clear boundaries, and to remain curious and non-judgmental. And I'm sure as you're listening to me describe what's called for, you're saying, well, that's nobody's like that. And the answer is, yeah, that's what we're working toward. We're working toward developing these capacities. Somebody says, how do the students at Evoke typically move through the process? Our son has just been there a short time, and I'm wondering what the process will be in terms of openness to learning and growing. There is a broadcast, I believe. You can look it up, Dawn and Sarah, on the beginning, middle, and end of treatment at Evoke, because I talk about this kind of curve. But I'll give you a short version of it before before Dawn posts the title and the link here. And first and foremost, there's some kind of denial. I don't belong here. This is not for me. There might be anger, there might be rage, there might be a threat of depression or not working, right? There's a resistance that's overt typically. Sometimes it can be covert. The covert resistance looks like hypercompliance. In outpatient therapy, we call it flight to health, right? So it starts off with resistance. And then there's the next stage would be some kind of cooperation, either because it's better to go along with it than it is to not. It's kind of fun sometimes. There's a lot of it that feels good to participate in, both the group culture and the hard skills and then the nature aspect of it. And the staff are really cool people, to be frank. And then once they taste the sweetness of it, there's this, I want this for myself. And then there's usually after that kind of high where they start to really feel like it can make a difference in their life, there's resistance, going back to the old way, anger, exhaustion, right? Maybe another version of resistance where they've been holding their breath and not being honest with themselves and not process all the information. And they themselves have been focused on cooperation and compliance. So then there's some regression toward the end. We like the regression because regression is human. And what we want to have an opportunity to provide for the child and for the parents is how do you deal with regression? You have regression. I'm going to have regression later this evening, most likely, or at least tomorrow, if I'm lucky, meaning I don't have it tonight. You're going to have regression. You're not going to respond with compassion and patience and ownership and clarity and non-judgment, right? So we all deal with regression. So working through that can be important to do within the context of the program. And then there's a period of transitioning. You know, where are we? What have we accomplished? What have we assessed? What's needed for the next step? So it's not that unlike Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, right? I believe it's denial, negotiate. I'm going to say I'm out of order. Denial, anger, negotiate, bargaining, depression, acceptance, or sadness, acceptance. And what we know about Kubler-Ross's stage, and the reason I don't have them memorized in order, is because people don't go in order. People kind of bounce all around. But part of your process is to kind of take a step back, to have the luxury that we're doing the heavy lifting right now, and you can take the time to process, to see where you plug in or fit in to the cycles, to see how you may or may not be contributing to a dynamic that you don't want to see continue. To start, if you're willing to even go deeper into your own work and see what unprocessed trauma, what unprocessed issues, what unprocessed messages you have that you would benefit and your children would benefit from you unpacking and unraveling. If it tastes sweet enough to you, you'll find yourself in an intensive, either ours or somebody else's. You'll get a therapist or parent coach, not because, remember this is important, not because you are innately toxic or pathogenic, meaning that you're not the cause of the problem, but you come to realize in this process, especially as a parent, you come to realize the most empowered idea that comes to you, which is that you are the cause. The way you're living your life is the cause of your suffering. See, we think it's our child that's causing our suffering. And of course, I have 4 children that I love as much as I'm capable of loving. And when they hurt, I can feel some of that. That's true. That's real. That's human. But that's something we need help with. Because if we take our angst, our worry, our anger, like I was describing earlier in a different way, and we simply make the child responsible for it, we say, it's you who's causing me to be unhappy. I can't sleep at night. I can't eat. I can't concentrate at work. I'm not okay. And it's your fault because you're using drugs or you're refusing to go to school or you're cutting on yourself. If we say that or think that or feel that, the child, on top of whatever anxiety, depression, substance use issue, whatever they already are dealing with, the burden of carrying our life on their shoulders is crushing. In essence, and excuse me, in fact, I would suggest that that's the core issue in the first place. I'm going to kind of, I mean, there is a secret. There is an idea that's not simple and doesn't solve everything in an instant. But if you guys want to know the secret to this work, that very few people see, or even when they're told it, they don't believe it. It is that children are taking care of parents. Parents don't know how to take care of themselves. We weren't taught what healthy attachment looked like. We weren't taught what boundaries and authentic love looks like. We were taught, and it wasn't their fault. I'm not picking on your parents. Their parents taught them it. I'm not picking on your grandparents because your great grandparents taught them it, and so on and so on and so on. It's part of the overall human evolution here, right? Is coming to this awareness that when we tell our children, "I'm happy when you do X, I'm sad when you do Y," with the implication that we may not be conscious of, that you need to shape up and stop that behavior, or do something different so I feel happy. We wire them for the disorders that are at the root of all of the symptoms that I'm describing. The Drama of the Gifted Child from Alice Miller, or The Misery of the Good Child by J.D. Gill, another version of the same book. Attachment Based Therapy as Taught in Parenting from the Inside Out by Daniel Siegel and Mary Hartzell, or The Journey of the Heroic Parent and the Audacity to Be You by me. It's all the same message. So you want to know the secret? And I teach this to the therapist. It's that, is that the child learns what others need of him or her or them, and they're inclined to give that to the other person at the cost of the authentic self. And when you lose yourself, and by the way, you've been told to lose yourself, but it's because you've been told, if you pay attention to what's in here, what's in your heart, it'll be chaos. It'll be a mess. Society won't function, we're taught, if people sing the music of their soul, so to speak. But the great thinkers have discovered and taught and passed on the idea that that's the solution. And it can get messy, right? When we wake up, it can look messy. Midlife crises are messy. Adolescence is messy. But the goal of life is to become who you are, to become your most authentic, even divine self, right? Your highest self, your wisest self, your most healed self, instead of your trauma responding self, instead of your inauthentic self, instead of your false self, which is what's often referred to as the antithesis of the authentic self or the real self. So if you want to know the secret, that's the secret, what I just told you. And I wouldn't believe it if I was you either, if this is the first time that you're hearing it. I believe it's some weird, almost incomprehensible idea that for sure doesn't fit my life. That's what I would think. That's what I thought when I was younger. But this is the secret. And you can see it. Once you see it, once you find it, you can't unsee it. You see it everywhere. You see it in conversations in the grocery store, on the phone with your parents. You see it when somebody at Denny's is talking to their child in the next booth. You see it on television. You see it in music. You see it in art. You see it in the classroom. The goal is to raise a child to become a healthy self. We get to have boundaries. That's our responsibility to ourselves and to them. There are limits, but the emotional coercion, the shame, the guilt, the fear, the anger, um, those all become part of the toxicity that the child internalizes eventually. And then what do? They start cutting on themselves. So they start medicating, or they start acting out sexually. And they do these things because they can't figure this out. They're confused. They're being told, in essence, at an unconscious level, that who they are is not okay. Like I said earlier about my own daughter, she's going to have to figure out how to live within a context where there are boundaries, not just in our home, but at school, in the workforce, in the world. That's part of her job, is to figure that out. But she doesn't have to live the life that I think that she should live, or her mother. And she doesn't have to date the people that I think she should date, and get the job I think she should get, and make the decisions I think she should make. She has to live her life. And that is what they are asking us to come in touch with. That's what their symptoms, their diagnoses are inviting us into, is this larger world that I'm describing of authenticity of the self. All right. Somebody writes, our 14-year-old son just started at Elements, another Willis program, a few days ago. The previous question frightens me because while I'm anticipating a long journey and not expecting a silver bullet, what if the quote, how you lose choice, quote, unquote, results in my child not being safe, which is my primary concern. Right now, um, him thriving is, of course, our goal. So, how do we keep him safe? That's exactly what I want for my children. That they discover their best authentic self, and I'm not afraid of the mess. I'm afraid of my son not being able to do that safely. I have an answer you're not going to like, but it's the truth. You can't keep them safe, ultimately. If a child wants to hurt themselves, they can do it eventually if they're committed to it. If your child has anorexia, if your child has a substance use disorder, if your child has depression with self harm, if your child has anxiety or other acting out behaviors that put them in harm's way, yes, it's my job and your job to try to have parameters to try the best. The fact that you have a child at a program is fantastic. You're trying. That's what I always say. When somebody tells me that they have their child or sent their child to a program, I only know one thing, and that is that they're trying. I don't know what kind of parent they are if that's the only data I have. But at the end of the day, this is the irony. You can't control it. I said to a client recently, I said, this is after working them for a while. I said, and they were struggling with a life-threatening eating disorder for many years and lots of money and lots of treatment. I said, your daughter could die. I said it to another client not long ago where somebody was struggling with substance use. Again, same thing, lots of effort, lots of interventions. And I said, your son could die. And in both cases, the parent said to me, why are you saying that? What's your point? And I said, I'm just stating the truth. And sometimes we don't want to deal with the truth. And in essence, to live and to be in relationship and to go forward, you have to accept the fact that ultimately you can't control them. Now, if that terrifies you even more and you think that's not helpful, I'm going to use a sports analogy because it's the best way to describe it. By the way, this is what movies are about. This is what music and art is about. Imagine playing tennis if you haven't played tennis. Maybe golf. Imagine something that takes practice and skill and discipline. I'm going to use tennis. I played tennis, not really good, but good enough. When I get scared, I lose my power and my accuracy. When I don't play scared, I'm much, much better. When it's game point or set point or match point, and I have to get that last point, if you have this experience, and again, you can translate it into any field that makes sense to you. Getting scared, I get tentative. I try to control it. I try to aim the ball. When I was a little league pitcher and I had a bad game, I remember one in particular where I had a bad game. I lost all ability to throw strikes, and I was trying to aim it. At one point, the catcher was standing fully straight up with his glove hand as the target at eye level because I kept hitting the dirt in front of the batter. And I was trying to guide the ball in there instead of trust my throw, let go. My high school counselor gave me a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, which is about this. So my answer is ultimately you can't save them. All you can do is what you can do. And to say anything else to you is to support a neuroses that will cause you to suffer longer and longer. What I have known when I've let go, I'm a better pitcher, I'm better at tennis, and I'm a better father and husband. Let me use an example from psychology to demonstrate. Lying is an attempt to control somebody else. We lie to get people to feel and think differently about a situation or about us or about themselves. We tell the truth when we have realized that we can't control what people think, or that it's a waste of our life's energy. Last example, my son, who is an extraordinarily gifted artist. In fact, if you want to follow him, at Salt Lake Jake is his handle on Instagram. He's fun. When he was at the Art Institute of Chicago, one of the top 3 art colleges in the United States, they're on scholarship. He was practicing oil and canvas, and his teacher walked up behind him to observe what he was doing. And she saw that he wasn't making much progress on this particular piece. And she stopped him and she said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I just don't want to ruin it. I like where it is and I don't want to ruin it." And the teacher said, "Now you have to ruin it. Because if you do it scared, it's never going to be anything wonderful. You've got to be willing to ruin it." Now, again, if you make a literal translation to your child, that's not the point. You have to face your fears. You have to face the part of what the child is reacting to is, see, human beings need to be individuals. They need to individuate, especially in adolescence. That's when the drive hits really strongly. So when you believe that you can control outcomes and they can sense that unconsciously, they will cut off their nose to spite their face. I'll say one last thing to close all this out. If you get into recovery for codependency, which is immersed in this idea of controlling outcomes, right? Codependency. If you get into recovery for codependency, I want to be clear with you. People in recovery for codependency are more authentic, more honest, set clearer boundaries, respond less from fear. So you don't become more passive. You don't become more weak. You don't become a worse tennis player, a worse pitcher, a worse artist. You become better. The reason that Bob Dylan is Bob Dylan is because he didn't care what people thought. And that's why he has one of the greatest libraries of lyrical poetry in the history of the modern world, right? So you've got some work to do with that to embrace the nature of your relationship with your child and their behaviors. And it will seem crazy and backwards and counterintuitive. And on the other side, it will all make sense. That makes sense. I hope that makes sense. All right. Looks like there are no more questions. I'm just going to go over the upcoming things and announcements. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are on Amazon and Audible. We filled up 2 of our conscious parenting classes. So November 4th is full, and I think it's full, and I think it's December 2nd. I'm not sure. Is also full. We're going to have another date coming soon. We have one more opening at our Finding You in November. It'll fill up. It may have even filled up by the time since I checked with my admissions team earlier today. If you want to do a deep dive in your own work, you want to unfold and explore this stuff, get a more personal experience of what I'm teaching about intellectually today, Finding You is the place to go. You can also do it online, half the price, half the time, November 11th. There are a couple of spots open there. Contacts and intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. We have free support groups for all of our current and alumni families. If you're a Wilderness current or alumni family, October 26th, that's in 2 days, is our next offering at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. We have one a month, an alumni-only meeting. That's tomorrow night, October 25th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Next month is November 22nd. For our intensives groups, we have one support group per month, November 8th at 6 p.m. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information. If you would like an attachment-based trained therapist to be a coach, or a coach that's trained in this work, the Evoke way, contact coaching at evoketherapy.com. They can do parent coaching, life coaching, marriage coaching, relationship coaching. We have pursuits trips for families and adults. Think sober light, sober fun, think therapy light. They're all customized, 3 to 30 days, all over the world. Can be in Utah, can be based out of our intensive house in Midway, Utah. We ask all current parents to try, please, if you are part of our program, even not, try a 12-step group. Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. See if you can hear the different way, the different language, the different paradigm. RefugeRecovery.org and NAMI.org are also places to go to get free resources and support in your area. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer to listen there, or you can go to Evoke's YouTube channel and listen there. You can find Evoke Therapy Programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy. You can find the intensives program, our Evoke Intensives program, on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And then we have an Evoke Therapy blog that is curated by our staff. Wonderful content coming out to each week. If you want to get back to people, for people that can't afford therapy, we have 3 charitable partners: ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky's the Limit Fund, and the Evoke Family Foundation. Just go to ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky's the Limit Fund.org, or EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. In honor of my very dear friend who passed away a few weeks ago, the Evoke Family Foundation has opened up an earmarked fund within the larger charity for those who identify as LGBTQ. So if your child or you identify as LGBTQ and you want to get some funds to help there, or you can donate there, you can donate or access the Peter Brown Pride Fund. There's a QR code here if you're watching live, where you can look at it on your phone and donate through PayPal to make it easy for you. My next broadcast will be tomorrow night. I'm going to be talking about the identified patient, which is a great next step after tonight and some of the questions I've had tonight. So, all right, folks, thanks for joining me this evening. I hope this is a helpful point of contact for and on behalf of the people that love you and that you love. Thanks for joining me and being willing to do your work, to listen to the difficult and strange things and try to expand your capacity and find out who you are. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow night. Take care. Bye-bye.